Good afternoon and welcome to our fourth in a series of 7 criteria for selecting an ERP system. There are several things that are important and we're going to kind of cover that today. So let's get started. So we're going to start today's agenda with a quick introduction of who Hudson River Computing is. What are the 7 overview of the 7 criteria for your ERP choice? Why is it important? Today's deep dive will be involving reliability and why is it important when you're choosing a system. So that's kind of the critical pieces. So Hudson River Computing was founded in 1993. We originally concentrated on accounting systems and it evolved into CRM and ERP systems along the way. We have kind of a unique staff in the sense we have a lot of experience. We've done a lot of implementations. The people have a lot of prior experience before coming to us. So they've actually worked in manufacturing environments, distribution, nonprofits, et cetera. And we're committed to selling high quality products. And everybody kind of says that, but part of it is some of what the choices are that we go through are some of what we're going to present here. Why is it important and what makes a quality product for us to choose for us to resell. And we're a small organization, but we're large enough to help you with your implementation and have the right expertise on staff, but yet we're also easy to access as we need to. So we're large enough to do what we need to do for you, and we're small enough where we can actually keep a personalized atmosphere to it. We actually carry 2 different products. We carry Acumatica, which is a cloud-based ERP system. Their quote is born in the cloud. And we also carry Microsoft Dynamics GP, which is a product that's been around for a number of years that is from Microsoft. So what are the 7 criteria? We talked about technology. Any of these you haven't seen, they are on the website, and you can actually link to it and see the previous videos. So what's important? Technology. Making sure your mainstream technology is relatively modern, et cetera, are important pieces. Functionality. The product, if it doesn't do what you need it to do, it is immaterial. So we need the functionality to be there. Integration is what we covered last week. And again, there could be important integrations that you do on a regular basis or live, basically, to, hey, we get the once a year import from the accounting firm for a large journal entry. Those kind of things are kind of important. What tools are available? Today, we're going to talk about reliability. Reliability allows us to choose products that have a track record of being reliable, and they're in an environment that is stable as well. So those kind of correlate. We're going to talk a little bit more detail about that. What kind of quality vendor support do you get, both from the reseller, such as us, or from the product itself, or both? And those are important factors, and we're going to come back to that next week. And we're going to talk about customizability and what's important about that. And it's not only being able to do the customization, it's also making sure that you maintain the upgradability of the software from version after version, so you can keep up with both the technology and functionality, et cetera, that the product offers. And last but not least, what's the value of the product? It's not strictly how many dollars are you spending, it's what you get back from the product and what is the overall value of what you're going to save or how it's going to work for you. So let's talk about the reliability timeline. And this kind of varies a little bit, for a little bit here and there, but in this case here, we're talking about, starting out in minis and mainframes. That's where I'm going to start. We can go back further, but, the bottom line is the systems did tend to be pretty reliable. Okay, they weren't nearly, in some ways, they were really complex, and in other ways, they're simple compared to today's standards. But the reliability tended to be there because the programming and the testing environment was right there. So if you tested well, and the programmer did what he asked, was asked to do, you ended up with a very reliable system that did what you needed it to do. The big detriment to this, it was costly. Okay, very few small businesses and only a handful of medium businesses ended up implementing the systems just due to the cost. Then in the late 80s and into the 90s, we started to have our PC-based systems, okay, text-based at this point. They weren't graphical yet, they were mostly text-based. And initially, the reliability varied. You had some products that were very reliable. There were some products that basically weren't quite as reliable, et cetera. But, the bottom line is it came down to, kind of who won in the end, right, so to speak. But the idea of it is the reliability initially varied quite a bit. And it's the same thing for the hardware. The networks and stuff that was being used at that time were typically Lantastic and Novell NetWare, and certain things we take for granted today, like a Windows environment for a network, weren't evolved yet. They weren't there. So most people in the mid market at this point, they were using NetWare. And it was a great product, and it was pretty stable, and tended to just run, and it gave a lot of functionality. The key area where you had a little bit more issue was redundancy and backup. Typically, the system was on one server, and then you were totally dependent upon how well your backups worked. And at that time, the backups were typically done on tape. And so the systems needed to make sure that people would change the tapes out and switch them out every day, on a regular basis, keep their tapes aside and do the proper rotation. And that happened sometimes, and it didn't happen other times. So your reliability actually became kind of an issue, okay, at times in this PC-based market at that time. Some of that continued on into the 90s when we got to the graphical base. A lot of that same type of server issue still remained. Okay, one of the differences is that the databases they were based on started to use a more reliable database. So for example, instead of running on something like Pervasive, which was, it could be a relational database, but really wasn't set up as a relational database in most instances, you ended up with separate files out on the network and all. During the late 1990s and into the 2000s is when SQL Server from Microsoft kind of took over in the mid-market for a large quantity of customers. And that actually brought a lot more reliability to the data itself. And it allowed you to put in things like commitments and rollbacks. So like if something happened in the middle of a post, you could actually just roll it back and start it over. Before that, if it happened where basically the post got interrupted, hey, you lost network connectivity, the power went out, whatever happened, you ended up with a situation where you had stray records in various tables throughout the system. So the using of the SQL Server became very important for the reliability of the systems. As time progressed in this area between, over the 2000s, things started to become more redundant. There's more redundancy built in, both in, the RAID level of the drives that were being used, the servers were using, as well as in some cases you had basically multiple servers running duplicate within the organization. Now, what that gave you is a certain amount of redundancy in the sense that, okay, if you have a data center and you have 3 servers for performance / redundancy running, and one of them goes down, the other 2 just keep running, okay, in the cluster. So it's relatively straightforward in a SQL cluster. The issue you run into, though, is something happens to that particular facility, what happens? And that's where that became quite difficult sometimes to have a recovery plan. So something happened to your data center. Okay, where was your data? Where could you reset up? How could you establish yourself again if it happened? Now, that does happen. I mean, we had a client where they actually had a fire and their facility burned to the ground. Okay, and that sounds like a, one in a lifetime thing, but you don't want to be that person. So they actually had some issues where their offsite backup was off and they restored the wrong server and those kind of things. But the answer is they had limited redundancy there. And the problem they ended up having was 2 things. One is they had an older tape offsite. Okay, the newer tape was burned, and then the recovery process took longer because not only did they have to recover from all those pieces and buying hardware and all, they also had to try to recreate some of their data for that time frame. And they lost about 3 weeks worth of data. Doesn't sound bad until you have to recreate 3 weeks of data and your paper has burned, okay, that you were developing it from. And this was back in the early 2000s where it was pretty common to have strictly paper-based. You didn't have a scenario where you ended up with electronic emails and things like that, where you're storing a lot of that data now like you do today. From 2013 to today, a lot of the cloud graphical-based systems have started taking over. Okay, so you have that built-in redundancy. Most of these systems have a cloud environment where there's 2 to 4 or 6 data centers involved in the back end. You don't know that from the use of the cloud center, but from the cloud software that you're using on the ERP side. But what's happening is behind the scenes, that's all being taken care of, and it becomes an important factor. So that's kind of what's in the more modern system. Additionally, the redundancy, in addition to the redundancy, you also have the backup. Okay, it's being taken care of by the cloud environments. And some of it's built in by the redundancy, but there's multiple reasons why you might need a backup or a restore. Sometimes it's because, oops, I didn't mean to do that large post and it's, goofed up our data because we set it up wrong, and or we hit wrong accounts and we just really want to roll it back. In those kind of cases, if you want to roll back to a point in time, you need a point in time backup versus, hey, I need a full recovery. Okay. And then last but not least, to get to that graphical base where you not only have the ease of use of the graphical environment, but also have that redundancy and backup, has become much more cost effective because it's built into the cloud environment, into the cloud products that you typically are purchasing. So that comes down to a scenario where it saves a lot of money, time, and error because, hey, what happened to the tape? Hey, that hard drive didn't work over there for that backup last night. Those kind of things are a thing of the past with the cloud environments that are there today. So let's talk about the cloud environments themselves. Okay, if we take a look at it, it's important to know the ERP product you're running, which cloud environment they're running in. Okay, you don't want it to be running on Jim's cloud environment. You know, if I set it up in my corner of my office and you kind of log into the web, that's not what you're looking for. You're looking for some of the top providers. All right, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But those reliable environments will make the product more reliable as well. If the product is running on a poor environment, the product will have its own issues because of the environment. So the idea is you want to make sure you're in a sound environment. It can also help determine performance. How scalable is the performance of the product? Meaning that, hey, right now we're only processing 100 invoices a month. What if we go to 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 invoices a month as we grow and change our business? The answer is the performance should be scalable. The larger providers will make sure that's a scalable process for you. Okay, versus having a scenario where, hey, Jim in the corner there, he has to have another server and it becomes a large conversation. Typically, you can spin up, have these upgraded literally overnight for better performance. Okay. Last but not least, it can help you determine how much downtime you're going to have. The better the environment, the less downtime you're going to have. Typically, the stability of the system is based more on the cloud environment it's in than the system itself in many cases. Not to say it's not important on both sides, but a lot of times if it's in a poor cloud environment, it'll cause more issues. So looking at what the major cloud products are out there, there's basically three major players in the market right now. You have AWS or Amazon Web Services, which everybody's heard. They're kind of the market leader as far as stability, reliability in the cloud environments, as well as ease of management, et cetera, as you go on. From a cloud standpoint with ERP, you're not going to have to worry about managing the Amazon Web Services. That's going to be happening behind the scenes by the cloud product provider, by the ERP product. Microsoft Azure, okay, pretty straightforward. You know, they basically have taken a lot of their products up to the Azure cloud. For example, SQL servers and things like that are all available from Microsoft that way. And then last but not least, you have the Google Cloud. So these are really kind of the top three. Okay, I have a slide here from Acumatica in this case. You know, don't take a look at it, but it's actually from the Magic Quadrant of who is performing well as far as market leadership, as well as reliability and ability to actually kind of drive the market. So if you take a look, Amazon Web Services is toward the top. If you have a choice between a product that's equally fits the bill, and it's on Amazon Web Services versus Google or on Oracle, I would pick the Amazon Web Services, because if you look at it, it's a much more reliable service, and they're the ones leading everybody else down through. So they're kind of ahead of everybody else, and they have the largest market share. And part of that's because they have that leadership as well as the reliability that people have come to trust. Not to say Microsoft and Google aren't good, it's just that Amazon's kind of a step above them along the way. They've executed it and are ahead of them. In some cases by quite a bit of time as far as that goes. So keep in mind, it's important to know some of the ones that we take for granted name-wise didn't make as good of a cloud transition as you would hope, and they can work well in certain environments, but they're actually kind of limited. Like IBM's a good example of that. If you're an IBM Blue House, then the answer is they might have a better cloud for you in some instances, depending what you're trying to accomplish. But maybe for the overall performance, if you're looking for kind of a cloud-based ERP, they might not be the best one to be based on. Right, so just to give you kind of an example of that. If we go a little bit further, what becomes reliability of the product now? Okay, we talked about the cloud platform. So if the platform's good, okay, what about the product? So here's some questions to make sure you ask. One is, how long has the product been on the market? You don't want to be the first person running the product. You want to make sure the product's been on the market long enough so you can see that it's actually been reliable for other people. And then in addition to that, how many installs do they have? The first 1,000 are typically the hardest, okay, for everybody. And so what it comes down to is if they've been on if they've been on the market for, say 4 or 5 years or more, they will have the newer technology, but in many cases, but if you go too far and hey, we've been in the market for the last 25 years, chances are some of their product has some dated technology in it. So it's a balancing act between how long they've been in the market, and you got to pay attention to that. As far as the number of installs, I like the magic number of 1,000. That's just kind of a round number. It doesn't have to be exactly that or more or less. But the answer is, if they have more than 1,000 installs, you're not the guinea pig for kind of the core pieces of the product. You know the general ledger is going to balance. You know that it's going to be able to create journal transactions pretty easily. You know that it's going to be able to cut checks and post them without too much difficulty. But those first, 100 customers, they're going to go through a bunch of testing on that, because everybody ends up testing in different environments and trying different things with the product. Once you get to 1,000 or more, it starts to settle down. If they have, 10,000 or so or more, it's even more settled down. So it helps the product become reliable. If you have third-party products that are involved, sometimes it's because of an industry niche that you're in. Sometimes it's because, hey, I like this product, except for I need this one little piece of software functionality that they don't include. Sometimes you can deal with a third-party product. Some of that falls in line with the rest of the product, meaning how many installs do they have? How long has it been on the market? So if you have somebody that's an expert in third-party product and they have one particular niche they fit in, and they've been doing it for 20 years, that's great. If they've developed in a new cloud environment, that's better, because they not only know the industry and what they need to do to make it work, but in addition, they're using newer technology. The second part of the question becomes that balancing act of, how long it's been on the market is what we were just talking about a minute ago. You don't want too long, too short kind of thing. The second part of that is the number of installations they have stored with your product. If you're the first one that they've installed with this particular product, you want to take that cautiously. It's not saying that you don't want to do it, but you have to be aware you're going to be part of the guinea pig in the test. Some advantages, though, is you might get more of what you want, because, hey, they're probably searching out exactly what they want to do, how they want to do the interface, those kind of things, how it's going to work. On the other hand, you're the guinea pig. So if something doesn't work, you're going to find more instances where it hasn't been thoroughly tested all the way through in some cases. So you might have to put up with some of those kind of issues that get resolved. If you're working with a good company, okay, that can make a difference. It can actually still work out okay for you. It's just that it becomes, set the expectations correctly. Hey, we might have a few more problems because they don't have 200 installations. We're the first one. There's going to be little hiccups that occur. And if they handle it well, it can work out well for you as well still. All right. One of the questions, if you're dealing with a third-party product, how are the products integrated? Is it developed in the same environment, or is it a separate environment with integration back and forth? If that's the case, it's obviously advantageous to be in the same environment when possible. If not, because of the niche and whatever you're doing, or if you have another product you're doing for certain things, the answer is, how's that integration going to work if it's already pre-built? Can you talk to somebody that's already done it? And again, how many have they done for integrations? And if the product environment is not the same as the core product, it's important to know what the environment is. Is it cloud-based? If it is cloud-based, what cloud is it on? Perhaps your core product is on AWS, but they're on Oracle for the other part of the product, or the third-party product. Those kind of things can cause issues in the sense that, sometimes reliability difference between the two areas, but it can also be a scenario of, sometimes you can have some different connectivity issues than if you're right in the same environment. So that's really what it kind of comes down to. There's not pluses and minuses there, and you have to kind of weigh them out. There's nothing wrong with necessarily, but you got to be aware of it. And then last but not least, what is the product code base? What is it in? Is it something that's common? Is it like C or C sharp? Or is it, hey, Jim's code base and I wrote out my own language? The answer comes back to, you want something that's quite a bit more mainstream than that. So it comes back to, using some reasonableness, because if you decide that, hey, we like this company and we want to go through there, et cetera, the bottom line is, if you have something that's less proprietary, over time, that's usually an advantage. So that's why we want something that's fairly good code base. And the second part of it is, we don't want something that's proprietary to them, because if we have that, then they spend a lot of time writing their code for their code base, right, versus writing functionality for us. So there's a balancing act there. It's not to say they don't develop their environment within the code base, it's just how they do it. Okay, to give you an idea, some of what we talked about today, and this is just an Acumatica slide. You should see similar slides from any product you end up developing or working with. You notice here, this last row, here's what we're talking about that kind of really hammers in that reliability from the standpoint of the systems. What kind of database is it using? Is it SQL Server? Is it well known? Those kind of things. What cloud environments do they support? In the case of Acumatica, they're primarily on Amazon Web Services. Okay, they do have the ability to private cloud into Azure, but the answer is most people are doing Amazon Web Services, 90% plus because of the reliability. And last but not least, what's it developed in? Well, the environments in Visual Studio, if I need to do something, in addition to that, hey, it's .NET and it's C#. Hey, those are common things. We're not using anything off the wall. And that's kind of the idea. That becomes important for the long-term parts of how the software works. We can go back through the functionality and say, oh, they got a lot of different functionality across a lot of different industries. That can also be a signal that they have a reliable core product, because if you get tied down into a product where they're having some functionality issues where things aren't working correctly, they'll get bogged down into that, and it's hard for them to release additional product pieces. And so you'll take a look at that and kind of go through that. So that's kind of the important parts of that. Okay, so in summary, what are the important things to watch out for? You want to make sure that you pay attention to what cloud environment the system is hosted in. Meaning that, it's best if you can pick the best, top 3 if you can, AWS, Amazon Web Services, Google or Microsoft Azure. And they'll be typically the most reliable environments for you. Is there any guarantee? No, stuff happens. The environment could be up, but your internet connection is down. Okay, is that rare? Yeah, it's more and more rare as we go. Things have become much more reliable. It's not often that the system itself goes down on the other end. It's usually a connectivity issue. And that's, again, less and less of an issue as time moves on. So take note of the top tier cloud hosting environments. How many installs does the product have? If you're working with a product that has 300 or 400, 500 installations, that sounds like a lot, but it's also still in that realm where you're still doing some of the beta testing for them. I don't mean that in a bad way. It's a sense that they can't possibly beta test every way how people are going to use the software. And so if you get above that number, it typically is advantageous. And then last but not least, what's the development environment that they're using? Are they using something that's got a stable base to it for the development environment? Or again, is it Jim's code where I'm spending a bunch of time, working on my coding structure so I can, develop? The answer is, you don't really want to get into that. So that's kind of the summary of how it all kind of works. That's kind of what we recommend for what to look for reliability, and make sure that you're consistent with it. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact us, and we can kind of elaborate on anything else you might need. Thank you very much.